All right, everyone. Welcome back to Skeptical Inquirer Presents. This is a series of live online presentations from experts who are devoted to advancing science over pseudoscience, media literacy over conspiracy theories, and of course, critical thinking over magical thinking. My name is Leanne Lord, and I am, as always, delighted to be your host. I am a stand-up comedian, author, Center for Inquiry Fellow, and fellow Earth Dweller. As a word lover, I am happy to share that today is National Scrabble Day. Woohoo! You see how I'm living. Don't tell my cat, but it's Dog Appreciation Month. It is also Alcohol Awareness Month. So you all know what that means. That means don't give alcohol to your dog unless they've had a really, and I mean a really hard day. Don't do it. Now, as we get settled in, I have a couple of quick reminders. CFI's podcast, Point of Inquiry, is available wherever you get your podcasts. And if you haven't already, I'm shocked if you haven't, get yourself a subscription to Skeptical Inquirer magazine. It's really, really easy to do. All you have to do is go to skepticalinquirer.org and sign yourself up. Also, if you have questions for our guests tonight, and I'm sure that you will, please type them into the Q&A and we'll try our best to get to as many of them as we can. Now, in recent years, we have seen the dialogue around vaccines devolve into like a highly contentious, emotionally fraught firestorm, and an ongoing collision between scientists and charlatans, truth and lies. Virulent, the Vaccine War, is a film that exposes the myths and shares the facts about vaccine science and its history and what it'll take to eradicate the world's most deadly diseases. Acclaimed documentary filmmakers Laura Davis and Tjardus Greidanus are joining us to talk about their new film, Virulent. It examines the history of vaccine hesitancy and the galvanizing effect COVID-19 has had on anti-vaccination activists. The film features scientists and others in the trenches, including friend of the show, Dr. Paul Offit, one of the world's preeminent virologists. Public health expert, Dr. Peter Salk, that's right, the son of polio vaccine inventor, Dr. Jonas Salk, and New York Times columnist, Kevin Roose, who writes about how disinformation spreads online. So without further ado, please welcome to the Skeptical Inquirer Presents screen, our filmmakers, Laura Davis and Tjardus Greidanus. You guys, thank you so much for being here. Please introduce, I try to give you a little bit of an intro here, but please welcome and tell us who you are.
Yeah.
Yes, hello everybody. Yeah, we actually got started, working on a film about Jonas Salk, and that was finished in 2013. And we interviewed Peter and Jonathan Salk, the two sons. And and what was so amazing about it was really that it in a sense showed, kind of the best possible outcome. Because polio was really a really feared disease. I mean, and it was a visual disease. You saw little children in iron lungs and wheelchairs. And so it was really, a very inspiring story because it happened in the 50s that Jonas Salk started working on this vaccine in Pittsburgh. And there was no government money involved. It was actually all done with donations, the March of Dimes. You would donate a dime and that raised millions in order to do it. So it was a very, inspiring story. And I remember the first time that we got some kind of a sense that there actually is something like vaccine hesitancy, which there definitely wasn't for the polio vaccine, was when we were screening it at the Napa Film Festival. And there was a woman who asked us, we were explaining, what the film was about. It was, about the polio vaccine. And she asked, is the film for or against? Yeah. And we had no idea what she was talking about.
About.
Right. because it wasn't really on anybody's radar. It was very much a sort of very much in the background for most people. And, so then, a number of years later, we started thinking about, should we do an update to this and see where the world is now, essentially, about vaccines. And we started a few months before COVID, and it was still talking about chickenpox and measles and things like that, right? And it was very much a fringe thing, this denial of vaccine, or being hesitant about it. A very small group. And then, of course, COVID hit and it exploded, and it was a real challenge trying to keep up with essentially what, as it was happening. I mean, we saw what a pandemic looked like, and I think most people had no sense of what a pandemic was like, of course, because eventually, I mean, vaccines have been, a victim of their own success in so many ways. So it was, it was a challenge. It was like being on a rolling platform because things were changing every week, and we would interview somebody, in the beginning, we were doing it in hazmat suits because nobody knew what it was doing. And I was so scared of it. I remember, Laura actually, using soap and water to scrub the lettuce, because we didn't know if it was on there. Right?
Yeah.
So of course, I mean, we've all gone through this and we've learned and we've, learned new skills very, very quickly. But so I mean, but it was a challenge, and we didn't realize how many, essentially tendrils it has in so many different aspects. I mean, conspiracy theories and now politics and of course the science and the pediatricians, who are essentially the front lines of trying to, encourage people to vaccinate. It's a huge subject, and we realized we could have made a series. We could have done like a 5-parter because each one of them could actually, justifies its own film. So it was a challenge, especially trying to find a pattern, to use all this material that we, all these interviews, these experts and pediatricians, but also parents, and journalists and behavioralists who we interviewed, to put that all into one thing that is watchable. And that's how we ended up with the movie.
And I'll just add a few things. I'll kind of fill in a couple of blanks that occurred to me while Tjardus was speaking. Tjardus mentioned that we had made this film about Jonas Salk and the creation of the polio vaccine, which was Operation Warp Speed in the 50s. It took him 6 years, which was lightning speed. I mean, even now that's lightning speed, the COVID-19 vaccines notwithstanding. I know Paul Offit spent over 25 years developing the Rototech vaccine. But Jonas Salk, and I know this makes me a little nerd, but Jonas Salk was my childhood hero because I grew up in Pittsburgh. And at least when I was a kid, Jonas Salk was more famous than Mr. Rogers. He was okay too. But Jonas Salk, man.
He was okay too. Huh?
Yeah. And then at some point we added Franco Harris. So Pittsburgh is, famous for Franco Harris, the Immaculate Reception, Jonas Salk, and Mr. Rogers. But anyway, in 2005, so we're going back almost 20 years, the University of Pittsburgh, where Jonas Salk did his work, created the vaccine, they decided to celebrate the 50-year anniversary of the creation of the vaccine. And the film that eventually became A Shot to Save the World, which first aired on Smithsonian and BBC and much more recently on Paramount Plus, it actually started as a student project in 2005. We didn't get involved till 2008, 2009, when I think the professor that was, the kids had probably graduated by then, and he didn't have a film. And he called on us and said, would you like to make this movie, finish this movie about Jonas Salk? And we thought, sure, why not? That sounded interesting. So that was actually how we met Paul Offit, because he wrote a book. He's written many books, but including books about Salk and the aftermath of that vaccine's debut. So we met him, we met Peter and Jonathan Salk, two of Salk's three sons, and started really getting interested in vaccines, which I have to say was something that I've always taken for granted until now. I mean, doctor says it's time for this vaccine or that vaccine, you get it. You don't argue, you get it, because you don't want some horrible disease. And because we do a lot of international travel, we've had, some of the more obscure vaccines that people don't typically have to get if they're living in the West and working in the West. But I will say that neither one of us has ever had any kind of reaction. Obviously, a reaction is possible, but I mean, we've never lost so much as a day of work. But anyway, fast forward. So now we're interested in vaccines. Fast forward to what, Tjardus, about 2019, the World Health Organization lists vaccine hesitancy as one of the top 10 threats to global health. What? And we start hearing about measles at Disneyland. And I'm hearing these horrible PSAs on television because there was an outbreak of pertussis also here in California where we live. And, I say that if a parent has never heard the sound of a baby with pertussis or whooping cough, coughing, they should listen to that before they decide not to vaccinate that baby against pertussis. It's horrible. It's horrible. But parents haven't heard it. So a lot of them simply don't know. Anyway, so we start making what we thought would just be an update to the Salk film. Let's do an epilogue. Like, I shouldn't say why don't people want vaccines, because you forget when you're immersed in the subject, most people do want vaccines, but unfortunately not enough now to have herd immunity against COVID and other illnesses. Anyway, we start doing these interviews, and in order for the experts that we're interviewing to make audience understand what a pandemic looks like, what an epidemic looks like, they're talking about avian flu in Asia or Ebola, a horrible disease in West Africa, but they don't really have a good example here in the US other than to say, well, around World War I, there was the so-called Spanish flu, which of course was worldwide. Anyway, so we're talking about Ebola and Spanish flu. And suddenly COVID hits. And I mean, suddenly, as Tjardus already has said, we were 2 months into the film. And we ended up having to go back and do additional interviews with many of these people because we said, we can refer to Ebola, but we no longer have to say, imagine what a pandemic would look like in this country. Because as you know, we were seeing those giant semi-trucks parked outside of hospitals in New York on the news. Refrigerated semi-trucks that were serving as temporary morgues. So we all knew what a pandemic looked like. I think, Leanne, maybe what we ought to do is just show people that are watching a few minutes from the film. It's the teaser. And I will try not to reinvent the wheel here as I share my screen. Mike and Leanne just explained to me like 6 seconds ago how to do this. So let's see if I can remember.
And she's an expert like that, that quickly.
I'm a genius at it now. Okay, here we go. And I'll just hit play. And
Le Covid-19 qui a touché plusieurs milliers de nos
Das Coronavirus breitet sich weiter in Deutschland aus.
Hospitals overwhelmed, first responders sick in extraordinary numbers.
It's historic. It has changed our country. It's taken people from us, and sadly, it will take more.
I have a lot of patients that may be hesitant about vaccines, but when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, it brings reality and smacks you in the face. Sadly, the anti-vaccine community started to co-opt the pandemic and start spinning conspiracies on a daily basis.
They have been fighting this war for more than a decade. There are established groups with established leaders, there are established tactics and strategies. And for them, COVID-19 has been the thing that they've been practicing for, is a national conversation about vaccine safety.
I got the worst horror stories. Kids going blind or intellectually challenged. What if I vaccinated my daughter Katie or my son Gabe and something happened to them? And could I live with that?
People who don't vaccinate love their children just as much as people who do vaccinate. Parents who are becoming more informed, us pesky millennials, want to make a decision for ourselves, and now we're having to go up against this medical system that is used to just using authority, and we're not accepting that.
I think that the parents should have a vote, perhaps the vote. Don't tell me how to treat your child. That's not the government's job.
There you go, baby. You want me to say, oh, it's okay to delay your shots. Oh, it's okay to take that risk. Your kid getting one of these preventable types of bacterial disease. No, I don't think that that's a good idea.
A major concern is the hindrance to routine childhood vaccines. If a coronavirus vaccine creates fear of all vaccines, then we could easily see a resurgence of these childhood diseases.
Could polio come back into this country? Do I think people who are shedding poliovirus could walk into Los Angeles Airport or LaGuardia Airport in New York? Yes. Do I think that could happen with diphtheria? Sure. Do I think that it could happen with other rare contagious diseases? Sure. These bacteria and viruses are out there. Let your guard down and they'll come back.
You should tell the truth in this film. See if any of those guys who you're talking to can defend themselves against what I just told you.
Great.
Thank you for giving us that clip, and no spoilers, everybody. I don't know if you even do spoilers on a documentary, but I've seen it. I've enjoyed it. I enjoyed it immensely because I think it's easy to get a documentary wrong. And watching this, I can tell that you guys took pains, and maybe it wasn't painful for you because you're pros at it, but you took what I think are the steps to get it right. And you weren't, it wasn't all, finger pointing. The line that caught me, or one of the many lines that caught me in the film, is that the parents, on some of them, they love their kid, and that fear of, am I doing the right thing? Am I going to hurt my kid? I can't imagine how deep that runs. I have a cat and I freak out when he gets sick. We're running to the vet first thing, So, something more serious like the health of a child, you see how this can just spin out of hand. TJ, you mentioned something that kind of caught you by surprise, but there's a long history here of vaccine denial. This didn't just pop up. And you talk about this in the documentary, that while there's an ebb and a flow, we are definitely on the upswing. This is not new, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, it goes all the way back, I think even before George Washington, and that is talked about in the film, that he was, advocating for a smallpox vaccine, even during the Revolutionary War. And I think, it is such a natural impulse to not want to put something foreign into your body, especially into your kids, I get it, right? So we really wanted to take a very, empathetic view of parents, because of course they want the best for their kids. That's a given. So, but it is, I think just with social media and everything, and just the information, as one of our experts Kevin Roose actually says, he's a journalist for New York Times. He says people now make their own news. You know, it used to be that we had Walter Cronkite and we had Dan Rather and we had Peter Jennings. We had these reporters so that we kind of all trusted. But now everybody kind of patches their own news together.
Their own truth.
Yeah, their own truth together in many ways. And of course, everybody's always encouraged to do research and things like that. But you got to find the research from the right sources.
Right. Yes.
So that is
what are your sources?
Yeah,
exactly.
Indeed.
And not make the mistake of thinking that even if you go to the right sources, meaning real scientists and not people that are trying to sell you, I don't know what, supplements, it doesn't make you them, you know?
Right.
or it doesn't,
it
doesn't give you their expertise, is what I'm.
Right. And there's definitely an anti-expertise bias that seems to be going on here. One of the things that, and we chatted about this yesterday, and so I want to mention it to the audience that's listening. You know, there is a generation, I would say after the polio generation. I didn't grow up with polio. That wasn't a thing. You know, that was a word that I heard and I knew what it meant, but I did not see it. I didn't see that. I didn't see whooping cough. I didn't see measles. But I am in a completely privileged position, and I think so many people are. You know, several people mentioned it in your film. I think you just mentioned it. You know, these sort of vaccines are the victim of their own success. Hey, we're fine. Everything's great. Why do we need this stuff? And it's like, oh, wait a minute. You know why we're fine? Everybody, just, you know, but that comfort can give you a certain, perhaps arrogance, or a false foundation into thinking that, we don't need these things because we don't know what that suffering looks like. I mean, I don't know about you guys. I'm a little older than I look, but this was my first pandemic. I'm going to be ready for the next one. I'm going to have a balcony in Italy. I think that's the way to do a pandemic. But this was indeed very scary, but not just for, you know, the health reasons of it, but someone in your film mentioned that it seems like the anti-vax community has been practicing for this. Mm-hmm. Like they were just ready, like this was their Super Bowl. You know, as you say, you were starting the film, or just before you were starting the film, you know, you're dealing with regular childhood diseases, not this gargantuan thing that took the world by surprise. And while you think this would galvanize the planet into, hey, let's fix this, the unexpected galvanization of people going, oh no, this is a plot, you know, and you're doing this in real time. Yeah. Like I can't imagine.
Yeah, no, you just made a great point. Sorry, there's a little delay. I didn't mean to step on you, but many people, including Paul Offit, who was not only a friend of Skeptical Inquirer, but is our project medical advisor, he freely admits that he got it completely wrong. He and others, and we wondered ourselves when COVID struck and when we heard they were working on this vaccine and we were hearing good things about them, you know, would that sort of bring vaccine hesitancy push it back to the fringes? And it, as well, I don't even have to say the obvious. It didn't. So there, I just said it. But
it seems like people are attracted to conspiracy theories, though. You know, like one of the things that really struck us was that when we looked at, you know, Netflix, or we looked, you know, on the internet for films that are actually about, you know, showing the science, they aren't out there. You can find 15 films about anti-vax, you know, because I think as Paul Offit, didn't he say something like, you know, it's a conspiracy kind of answers all the questions in a way. He said it better than I did.
Yeah.
But something along those lines, and people are attracted to it. It's intriguing, you know. So I think it's interesting, and then the news gets around through, I think, you know, peers in many cases.
Social media, friends talking to friends.
Exactly. We had this one case when we were doing interviews in Pittsburgh.
The Uber lady?
Yes. we came back from Pittsburgh and we were at the Los Angeles airport, and we had all this equipment with us and everything, and we went to hail an Uber. And the lady hailing Ubers was looking at our equipment cases and said, what are you doing? And we said, making a movie about vaccines. And first of all, she immediately assumed that it was an anti-vax film. But then she also said, oh yeah, I just told my friend who just had a baby, don't get your kid vaccinated. Don't get all these vaccines.
If I can interrupt, the exact quote was, your baby doesn't need 3,000 vaccines.
Right, right. Now here's a lady, and she was very, very nice, but she was hailing Ubers, and she is giving medical advice to her friends whether or not to vaccinate.
And I was about to argue, but it was 2 a.m. and Tjardus literally pushed me into the Uber before I got into it. Otherwise, it would have been 4 a.m. But I mean, I think the real point, and this is really something that surprised me a lot, you can speak to whether it surprised you as much as it did me. I guess if you had asked me, who are the people that don't want vaccines? And I didn't really distinguish at that point between the hardcore people, whether it's RFK Jr. or the Del Bigtree. We can name them. The Center for to Counter Digital Hate in London has a list. I forget what they call it, the Terrible 20 or something like that. So there are those people, and the hardcore people I don't think are going to be affected by this film at all. But I wasn't distinguishing at the very beginning that small group of people from the people that you've seen in that teaser, the mothers, Kathy and Corey, nor the lady who was hailing Ubers, who are not really anti-vaxxers. They're, I'll say, misinformed. They have bad information. They're worried. And they're not idiots, far from it. We met people that I would characterize as smart, intelligent and reasonable in every way but this one. And that tells you, or tells me something, which is the anti-vax people, and now I'm talking about the leaders, they are way better than we just meaning people that believe in science. I hate to say pro-science as though pro and anti-science are, I'm giving weight to two equally valid points of view, but they're really, really good at using storytelling to spread misinformation and disinformation. And I'm making that distinction, and I'm sure you're all familiar with it. And so Tjardus and I thought, well, we're storytellers too, although not so good at social media, but we are storytellers. And so we decided to make the film and to sort of turn, take a page from the anti-vax playbook and use stories. So I'd like to show you one of those stories. I will say before I show it to you in just a sec, that, you see terrible stories. I mean, if any of you have seen Andrew Wakefield's film Vaxxed, which is, I think, by far the most successful of the many, many anti-vax movies, they show terrible, terrible footage of children that are clearly damaged in some way. I mean, it's not fake footage. Those kids are hurting. But did vaccines do that to them? We have no idea, because if you ask for proof that this was a result of a vaccine, they don't have it. I mean, there's no doctor who will say, yeah, this kid was fine. And then I mean, there's just no proof, but it is very, very, it moves you. I look at those stories and feel terrible, but I remind myself it's not proof that vaccines made them that way.
Yeah, and by the way, Andrew Wakefield, he was the doctor who essentially, was tying vaccines to autism, which now has been completely debunked, but he is still making bank on it. That's the amazing thing about it, is that it has now been debunked in many, many different countries. They've done studies, they've, done the science on it, but people still believe it.
Yeah.
That is still a kind of a meme that is still going around, and it has nothing to do with that.
Yeah. And by the way, he was also trying to develop his own measles vaccine, FYI, while he was saying that the one that was already approved by the FDA and foreign agencies as well was causing autism. And some of you may already know this book, but there's a great book about the Wakefield case written by the British journalist Brian Deere. I think Brian Deere spells his name like the animal. I don't think there's an E like John Deere. And I'm just blanking on the name of the book, but if you go Brian Deere and Wakefield, you'll find his wonderful book. So let me just show you one of the stories that we include in the film. And here I go again with the share, and make sure I play the right video. Here we go. All right.
He got sent home from school with a fever. I took him to the doctor, got meds. And the next day he was clingy and fussy and whiny. And we went to bed. And when I woke up to give him his sippy cup in the middle of the night, he was unresponsive. I called the ambulance. And then after they sectioned him, they told me he had something called acute necrotizing encephalitis. I feel like he's stuck at age 3. They can't give me any answers like when I ask questions because they didn't expect him to live at all. So anything he's doing is positive in progress. So it's hard to forecast his future because they don't know. Let's go. Come on. You got it. Well, I hope that by the time he's a teenager, he'll be able to walk, because it's starting to get harder to carry him. He's more than half my size now. I don't know. I don't know how I want to say it. I think they should use Andre's story definitely as a cautionary tale of what potentially could happen if you don't get a vaccine.
I've seen this a million times, of course, but it gets me every time. And one of my kind of pet peeve hardly begins to describe it. The phrase I hate most next to do my own research or do your own research is just the flu. What is just the flu? At best, you'll be in bed, you'll feel terrible, you'll be sneezing and coughing and achy and have, what's just the flu? And worst case, and I just looked this up to get the latest stats because I try to be accurate, the 2019-2020 flu season, which is the most recent year for which we have the statistics, there were 40,000 pediatric hospital admissions. Almost 500 children died. And in the entire population, there were 390,000 hospitalizations and 25,000 deaths. So, don't talk to me about just the flu. And as I'm sure probably most of the people, maybe everybody watching this, you can get sick after you get the flu. Either you're having a little reaction to the flu vaccine, or some years they just don't guess right, and that the strain that you caught was not in the vaccine. So it didn't cause your flu, but it didn't protect you. Anyway, end of sermon. I'm wondering, Leanne, I see there's quite a few questions.
Yes, there are indeed. There are indeed. Let's see here. And we talked about this a little bit, but I'll say the question: is there a theory as to why anti-vaxxers hold on to their beliefs in spite of, the truth? Is it just as hard to change an anti-vaxxer's mind as it is to get them to change their religion, for example? Is this a deep-seated, deeply rooted set of beliefs held at the level of religion? And I know that we had a guest who challenged all of us and said, when was the last time you changed your mind about anything? Just in the spirit of recognizing and being compassionate to other human beings, it is incredibly difficult to change people's minds. But is there something, maybe different about anti-vaxxers? We always want to think people are different than us, but is this film, your answer to that in a way?
Tjardus, do you want to answer?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I mean, there are lots of reasons, and people that are smarter than I am can, I'm sure, list many of them, that people cling to beliefs. And, that whoever your guest was who said that, that's a really good point. Because, all of us, you want to think you're right, you dig in your heels. It's hard to admit you're wrong, even over stupid things, let alone big things, particularly things that might have harmed or could have harmed your own child or somebody else's. But as people have explained to me, and I've come to think this is true in many cases, it feels so good to belong to something. So, for instance, when Tjardus and I were covering an anti-vax protest in the state capital of California, in Sacramento, they were protesting our vaccine legislation, which is a story we get into in the film. There were a good 2,000 people, and it was 106 degrees that day. It was a lovely summer day in Sacramento. I mean, that takes a lot of commitment, 106 degrees, and there's 2,000 people out there, and they're holding up signs and they're shouting, and Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s got his booth, and nurses who, I don't know what they call themselves, nurses who don't vaccinate, that group was there, and firemen who don't vaccinate. And I will say, as an aside, this is not really even my point, but it's an observation. It was the whitest group I've ever been in outside of, Northern Europe. We saw only white people, perhaps fewer than 10 African-American people, and it looked like around half of them were a group that had come together. And when we briefly retired to the shade, a guy walked by us. We weren't even clear whether he was coming from the protest. He smiled, we said hi, and he said, "It's great to see so many white people together." And that was like, I know, I didn't have the Uber lady reaction where I was gonna grab him by the throat, because I couldn't believe my ears. And by the time I said to Tjardus, "Did he say what I think he said?"
He said that.
And Tjardus confirmed that he was long gone. But my real point, getting back to the point, is that we're just there to observe and to film. It almost felt good to be part of a group because they were so upbeat and they were happy and they were fighting the good fight. Okay. Those of us who think vaccines and other matters that are good for the public, for public health, we're not out there. Well, there have been a few small protests where people are like, "Thanks, science, I don't have polio." But those rallies they're not really protests, but those gatherings are few and far between. So I think just being part of something feels really good. Go ahead.
What was interesting about it too was all the kind of different groups that had come together, and that really showed you that it really cut across, partisan lines in many ways, because you had a group of the Proud Boys were there.
The only ones wearing masks, by the way, besides us. But that was just to hide their identity. This was after January 6th.
There's this thing called the horseshoe theory, where kind of left and right kind of come together, and they're everybody's kind of like teaming up, and it is. So it's a sociological experience that you're witnessing, and it really shows what crowds and mob behavior, and you could feel it in the air. I mean, you really could feel it in the air there.
Yeah, and as we get in discuss in the film, or some of the people that we interviewed discuss, there was a mom, Kathy is her name. You saw her briefly in the teaser, and her story is quite dramatic, and I'll save it for the film. But suffice it to say that she became an anti-vaxxer because some close friends and family members were essentially misunderstanding Catholic doctrine. She and her family and a lot of her friends are members of the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church, and no major church, is against vaccines, but they misinterpreted some doctrine. So they got very, it just became an echo chamber. You hang out with the people that are like-minded. And as Kathy says in the film, we knew and others didn't, and weren't we smart? Well, she had a real come to Jesus moment that I won't spoil now. And we understand why she, when you see the film, you'll understand why she changed her minds, but even changed her mind. But even people with less dramatic stories, and there's one, Corey, who was the young woman in the teaser with, I think she has like a nose ring and her hair is 6 colors. She was a doula. And in that natural childbirth community, I'm told by other doulas, it's very, very common to be anti-vax. They're all natural, forgetting that terrible things are natural, like death,
aren't they?
Lightning, being, caught in an earthquake. I mean, there's lots of natural things that are not good. But anyway, the way she finally climbed out of that rabbit hole herself was she and a nurse friend who was also anti-vax. Again, 2 really bright, young, well-educated women. They started to confess to each other that they had doubts, like, what if we're wrong? But as Corey says, you just hate to admit that. You dig in your feet. You don't want to be wrong. But she and her nurse friend, they just started doing some reading. In other words, looking at not only the anti-vax point of view, but looking at what others with expertise in virology and the human immune system and public health had to say. And they were like their own little 2-person support group. And they finally concluded we were wrong. And that peer-to-peer thing is more powerful. I think, again, people that have really studied this seem to agree that it's stories and peer-to-peer more than hitting people over the head with data. I think the only people that care about data are scientists, as they should. But I think the rest of us, even those of us that might be capable of understanding data, nonetheless are more motivated by.
And our doula also made, towards the end of the film, really one of the statements that, in a sense, kind of encapsulates the entire message of the film is what she was more or less saying. I'm paraphrasing now. It's okay to change your mind, which I thought was a really powerful thing.
Wow.
To essentially button the film up with, and having it come from her, because she went through a whole arc of changing her mind, and was smart enough to recognize it.
I think that's very powerful, to have a convert, so to speak. And speak, we have many questions here that are asking, where can people see the film? And I just want to point to folks, if you haven't seen it already, in the chat, we have links. I found the book, Laura, that you mentioned.
Oh, good.
It's The Doctor Who Fooled the World. And I put that link in there. We also have the link for how people can see your film or request a screening if you are part of an organization and you say, this would be great for our group. That link is in there, and then how to support the film.
Thank you, Leanne.
Of course, and we'll mention that again as well. We had a guest many sessions back who was indeed had come out of the QAnon experience, and what you said, that thread of that community, that support, that feeling that that's you and your friends against the world, fighting the good fight. That's very powerful. That's very powerful stuff. I have a question here. Stuart, hey Stuart, he's been on the show. Oh my goodness. And this is a bit more of a personal question. How did you find Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as a person? Like, he seemed like such an odd mix of good intentions and passions and a wish to do good. Yes. ...
He remains a mystery to me. And I want to preface what I'm about to say with the admission that the extent of my psychology education is Psych 101, my freshman year, he also is making a ton of money, just in case anybody's wondering. All of his children's health defense tax returns are online, they're public, and he's making a shitload, pardon my language, of money. He's the second richest Kennedy cousin, but you can never have too much, of course. But I don't think he's exclusively motivated by money. I think there's the attention it brings him, but he did such a weird pivot. Because, 10 years ago, although I think his anti-vax stuff started before 10 years ago, but I wasn't aware of it then. If you had asked me or most people, I think, if they knew Bobby Kennedy Jr. at all, other than as the namesake of a man who was very much respected by many in our country, you'd go, oh, he's a steward of the waterways. He's all about clean water and getting toxic dumping out of our, that was a good thing. And he believes in climate change. So how the heck did he take this left turn? How can you believe in climate change? I mean, I believe in the climate science would be a better way to phrase that. How can you be for cleaning up the waterways and yet be so full of misinformation, put it kindly, about vaccines? And I don't get it. We only spent a few hours at his house, and I spoke to him a few times on the phone, and we didn't hide our intentions. It's not like we pretended that we were of a similar point of view. I think there's an arrogance. I think he was going to change our minds. And when he didn't, he's very quick to anger. I didn't try to make him angry, but it's pretty easy. At one point, he pointed at me and said, "You disrespectful woman." And I said to Tjardus after, I should have said, "Thank you."
Yeah.
But, I mean, he's kind of an angry guy. Many of you may have read that when he and his wife, Cheryl Hines, the actress, had a Christmas party, they requested on the invitation that guests be vaccinated or take a rapid test before they came into the home. He blamed that on Cheryl. All 6 of his children are vaccinated. He told me if he had it to do over again, he wouldn't vaccinate them. And, he made that awful remark comparing anti-vaxxers to victims of the Holocaust, saying they had it worse than Anne Frank because she could escape through the Swiss Alps or some crazy thing that obviously she was not able to do.
He doesn't know his geography,
No.
by the way, because Anne Frank was in Holland,
Yeah.
not next to Switzerland.
So I don't know. There's part of me that wants to feel some compassion for him, because I do. My default, I think, is to try and feel compassion for people, although that compassion is tested when I look at the damage he's doing. And I think of inside that man, is the 14-year-old boy, son of a murdered father, and one of a zillion children. I think they had 11 kids, so maybe not getting tons of attention, and serious drug problems. He was a heroin addict, etc.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean that's heavy stuff. But he's hurting other people now and hurting other people's children. So I guess that's where I draw the line at compassion. I hope that answered the question.
No, I think it did. Steve Bowman asked a question, and I want to tie it into something you said here and in the film, that numbers, statistics, that doesn't resonate with people. It's stories. And Steve asked, why didn't the TV news show more graphically what unvaccinated people dying in hospitals from COVID looked like? Could that have been an approach? Because our media isn't really shy.
Although I thought
So,
they
I mean,
did. No,
Yeah,
I saw. Of course, I was looking for it, Steve. So maybe that's why I was more aware of it. I mean, I saw some pretty awful footage on TV. That's a question for the news departments more than us.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm hyper aware of it, so I did see it.
Okay. I guess for how this might be a you question is, do you think more of those images more prominently, like you're not looking for it, they're just there? Seeing those images would have helped more. In turn the tide and stop this anti-vax turn that we seem to have taken.
I have no sense of it's difficult to answer.
Yeah, we hate to admit, we hate to dig in our heels and admit we don't really have a good answer to a very good question. One thing, and I think we all did see this because you didn't have to look hard, is when you would see images or interviews or footage of very sick people, there was right away the anti-vaxxers saying, that person, this whole died suddenly movement is an example of no matter what's wrong with you, you died because of COVID. Was it was it not Jackie Robinson, Hank Aaron. Sorry, I'm thinking of a baseball player I admire and I know nothing about baseball. But when Henry Aaron died, months after he got the vaccine, COVID vaccine, it killed him. Well, maybe because wasn't he like 90? I mean, any excuse to blame it on the vaccines rather than to say, in his case, most likely, I mean, something has to kill you when you get up into your late 80s, 90s. I don't know. I wish I could answer that question. Sorry.
Well, I'm not even sure there's an answer. Don't feel bad. You know, it's just we're speculating on that one because, you know, what would it take to convince people? I love that in your film you had that mom who took that journey and had that arc of, you know, she's anti-vax and things happened and now not. And I would hate for anyone to have such a tough road to hoe. You know what, to learn a lesson the hard way, as my parents would say, back in the day. Thank you, James, for this. He said, I remember on Sunday after Mass, my parents taking themselves and their 7 children to the local hospital to get the Salk vaccine, no qualms. Like, so these were religious folks and they were still, okay, get in the car, we're going. How did we fall so far away? And this is a big question, and I'm sorry. How did we fall so far away from trusting science?
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, yeah, you have to be a sociologist to figure
James
all that out.
I'm going to venture a guess without having met them, obviously.
I mean, it just is obviously not the same kind of trust that there was in the 50s. I mean, one of the people that we interviewed made the point that, you know, the Second World War was very much about mobilizing groups of people to work together to end the war, to essentially, you know, win the war and move on. So that was far more in the kind of zeitgeist, you know. I mean, still in the 50s, I think. You know, so many things have happened, like Watergate, and I mean, there's so many things that happened before that, and so many things that happened after that. And then with social media, I think is a really big factor. You know, again, that idea that anybody can put their own news together is you know, that can work against people. I think you know, the same kind of trust is not there. And yet, when, you know, a big tragedy happens, like in our earlier film, actually, Paul Offit mentioned this. You know, when 9/11 happened, you could feel that kind of that all at once everybody kind of pulled together. You know what I mean? It kind of, we all at once felt again like a community for a moment. So it is in us, you know, in a sense. But you know, there's just a lot of splinter groups now that have you know, been created, or at least have found a voice through social media. It's a difficult thing. It's a very difficult thing to overcome.
Yeah, I'd like to point out that was the last time Rudolph Giuliani had a coherent thought. But, you know, when I said James's parents were scared without knowing them, I'm guessing they saw on the front page of the newspaper how many kids had polio, and the swimming pools were closed, and the movie theaters were closed, and they saw kids with crutches. Yeah.
You mentioned something, and it's just occurring to me to go back when you were covering a protest and how ethnically non-diverse it was. Thank you. You talked about this in the film, and I'm glad you talked about it. There is vaccine hesitancy in the Black community, in the immigrant community, but for good reason. You know, the history with the medical community, you know, everybody I know knows Tuskegee, you know, or thinks they know it, or they've had, you know, we've all had experiences with the medical community that have left us less than enthused. So, and again, no spoilers. I don't want to spoil anything for anyone who's going to watch the film, but you do talk about it there.
And that's hard. That's so hard.
It's very hard
to address. You know, I was talking to a woman, an African-American sociologist who we were hoping to interview for the film, and it didn't work out. But, you know, her take on it was, I mean, yes, of course, she mentioned Tuskegee, but she said, you don't have to go back to Tuskegee. She said, younger people maybe don't know what happened. She said, just look at what happened last week to some prominent not prominent person, but some ordinary person who suddenly becomes prominent because of some terrible thing that happened. So it's very hard to blame African American people for it. The widespread, I won't say everyone, because it's not like it's a monolithic group of people, but there is widespread distrust of the medical establishment and government, and for very good reasons. And I'll just quickly share a story that we didn't have time to put in the film, but one of the men in the film, Robert Saucedo, who's the CEO of Community Build, which is an organization in South LA, we interviewed him. And he admitted himself that at first he was not really anti-vax, but vaccine hesitant, although he ended up being one of those people that do the unglamorous work of just knocking on doors and speaking to neighbors, trying to get neighbors vaccinated. And he said when the vaccine was first released, and people like me, we were sitting in our cars waiting for hours, for our turn. He said there was a surplus of vaccine in South LA because people were afraid to take it. And he said, as one of his, just one of his neighbors put it, since when are we first to get anything? And he said, right? And he said, what changed people's minds was, I guess, word got out. And so people, as Robert put it, from Malibu and Beverly Hills, who had never, probably set foot east of La Cienega Avenue in their lives, that's an LA reference that you may or may not get, but they had never been in South LA, let's put it that way. They were suddenly showing up because you could actually get the vaccine there. And he said at that point, many people in the area became convinced that if the people from Malibu and Beverly Hills were taking it, it probably was safe, and then uptake increased.
Yeah,
I remember that very well. Yes.
Yeah, he also mentioned that, a lot of people, I think maybe even including himself, thought, I want the white people's vaccine.
Yeah, that was a rumor.
That was a rumor that was out there. And this is an educated guy. He's a sophisticated guy, So it was, that was eye-opening in many ways. We had never imagined that.
That people would think to be a separate vaccine, but we heard it from enough people that we regarded as well-educated, well-read, not crazy, not conspiracy theorists, that we understood it was believable to many people.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of culture, psychology, history, sociology to unpack just in that story. But I'm sorry it didn't make the film, but thank you for sharing it. Friend of the show, past guest, former boss, I don't know, can I say all those things? Neil Tyson is in the house. Hey, Neil. And he wants to know, many people in the anti-vax movement are not anti-vax, but anti-government legislation. You do talk about that, that requires you to get vaccinated. Does your film address this freedom movement and freedom?
Yeah, big time. We're flattered, Neil, to have you with us, because I know you're the executive producer of another film, an excellent film, A Shot in the Arm, that we've seen about the same subject. And we're glad there's another film. As Paul Offit said to me, and he appears in your film, Scott's film as well, he said, I wish there were 100 of them, meaning, as many pro-vax films as there are anti. And just briefly, Scott Kennedy's excellent film takes quite a different approach to the subject than ours does. So I think, this town, this world is big enough for both of us, but it's a very good film. To answer your question then, Neil, and I hope you will see the film. Yeah, we get into that a lot because, back when anti-vaccine or vaccine hesitancy, it's always been a thing. There was a Supreme Court case in 1905, but when I think Frontline did a thing on called the Vaccine War, actually, in 2010 with Paul Offit, where he was forced to essentially debate Jenny McCarthy. But back then it was sort of the self-described crunchy moms who didn't want toxins. It wasn't so much about, maybe I'm not even against vaccines, maybe I am vaccinated, just don't tell me what the F to do. Well, that's a big part of it now. And yeah, we talk about that extensively. It's the
liberty movement.
Yeah, the liberty movement. And that can be people with all sorts of different beliefs about their own health, and maybe they're not so into public health. I think at some point the the social contract has been broken. Or was broken. I just hope not irrevocably.
I want to remind everyone who's joined us tonight that there are links in the group chat for you so you can request a screening of the film for your organization. You can also, if you want to support with a tax deductible contribution, you can do that as well. The link and the email address are here in the chat for you. You mentioned that there were, and this is my last quick question for you before we wrap up, that there were things that did not make it into the film. Like you can't put everything in.
Yeah.
But you also said that this could have been a series. Are there thoughts in that direction? I mean, I know it's a crap ton of work, but are you considering maybe doing an epilogue and then turning that into another documentary?
I'll let Tjardus mostly answer that because he's the one that had to deal with 70 hours of footage. I will say that unless people start sending us money, and soon, we've reached the point in our budget where, frankly, we don't have the budget to do that. And really, what our goal is, and then I'll let you address just all the footage and the stories that we have. But one of the things that we're doing, people say, well, why do you charge? Why is there a license fee for screenings? And it's pretty modest. But the reason is because we have aspirations beyond getting the film, say, onto PBS. And of course, there will be educational distribution. And we're already in some schools and universities and medical and nursing schools. But because of the strong belief that we've come to have as a result of the film, that stories are what change minds, we want to take stories that are already in the film, as well as many stories that did not make it into the film, and create little short palatable bites that we can make available free of charge to people in communities where there isn't a lot of access to good information. And I am not talking only about inner city, although that's obviously one important area that I'm thinking of. But we've also gotten lots of just emails from people in rural Oklahoma and rural Alberta. I just talked to a nurse from southern rural Alberta. And people in those communities aren't getting the information they need. And their healthcare providers, nurses, doctors, they may be pro-vaccine, but nursing and medical schools don't teach them how to talk to patients, and they're pressed for time. And what if we could just make our stories, 10, 20 of them, as many as people want or need, available free. So you can just show this to your patient, maybe on their cell phone or in your office on your cell phone. Watch this. It'll just take 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes, and hope that will prompt conversations, help people that are trying to encourage people to make good decisions about their health to give it another thought. And then they have to also kind of be caseworkers and say, if they don't change their minds on the spot, which they may not, can I call you in 2 weeks? That takes time. But do you want to talk about the 70 hours?
I'll talk about the 70 hours. It's always tempting to dip back into it because you get so steeped into it, right? The whole process was essentially that Laura would do the interviews. So she did the research and everything, and she would conduct the interviews and I would shoot them. But then I was essentially given, a couple of bushels of of material, which added up to about 70 hours worth of interviews. And these are great interviews. I mean, the process of editing something together is really about, trying to, pick snippets out in a sense to build a story. Right? That's the whole editing process, of course. But I think because people's attention spans have become a lot shorter with YouTube, and nobody has time anymore to sit over a 90-minute movie. I think short little pieces would be really impactful, because I think there will be so many more people who are able to watch it. But
I will.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, not at all. I'm just the thought that hit my brain, and of course, in the brain, out the mouth. I'm thinking you guys need a TikTok account I don't, if they're using social media for their side, I don't see why you can't use it for your film and show those snippets, those small things that you were talking about. You'd be surprised at how useful and pervasive those things can be. And people are doing really, really good work on social media platforms.
We will use our donations, when I say to get it into those communities. I mean, also one of the ways to do that, and it's not a joke, TikTok, I'm big time, is to find some, I don't know, 15-year-old or 18-year-old, whatever the legal age is for a part-time job, that we can, somebody young, that we can pay, frankly, to help us with this, because it's not that we can't learn it, but
but it is a crap ton of work. I do. Everyone keeps badgering me to get an assistant for my social media. I know how much work it is, but I also know that for something this powerful.
Yeah, and just having an innate understanding of it, because I'd probably be the person to go on TikTok and post like an 8-minute video and think it was really.
And you can't see that. Yeah, no, hire a pro. Yeah. But listen, I thank you for indulging me. We're a little bit over time, but I want to thank you both for the work that you've done, for the time and expertise that you've shared with us. And I saw this question in the chat, but I know the answer automatically that yes, if you've missed any of this conversation, it has been recorded and it will be available tomorrow for you to catch up, rewatch, and share. And that'll be at skepticalinquirer.org. And so thanks again to both of you. And as always, my thanks to Skeptical Inquirer, the Center for Inquiry, tonight's producer in the background, always on it, Michael Powell, thank you so much. And of course, a big thanks to all of you in the audience for taking the time to share the evening with us. Laura,
Leanne,
thank you. And
yes, if I may, I know I interrupt a lot and I'm so sorry, but we love.
No, I do the same thing. What do you need?
I just wanted to make sure that I let people know that if they have a question that we didn't get to, we're easy to reach. The email is screenings, plural, at virulentmovie.com. And I think you put that in, you may have put that in, but
it is
at virulentmovie.com. Feel free to contact us. Does not have to be to request a screening. If you just have another question that we didn't get to, feel free. Thank you, Leanne. And thank you.
Oh, no, thank you. And that is incredibly, incredibly generous. Thank you for that, for offering that to our watchers this evening. But everyone, if you are a Star Trek fan, you know what time it is. Time to go see the season finale of Star Trek Season 3 of Picard. Live long and prosper, everybody. Good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.